Everyone gave up on those kids until she knocked on the door. What happened next changed their lives forever. Like, comment, and share if this story touches your heart. No one tells you how loud grief can be, how it echoes in the quiet moments, filling every corner of a house with what once was. Our home in the suburbs of Seattle used to be filled with music, dance parties in the kitchen, and bedtime stories whispered under warm blankets. But all of that went silent the day my wife, Allison, collapsed on the kitchen floor and never stood up again. A brain aneurysm. That's what the doctors called it. A medical term that sounded far too neat and sterile for something that shattered our world in an instant. My name is Michael Harper. I used to be someone, a hard-nosed investigative journalist who could smell a lie from a mile away, whether in a politician's office or a dirty alley behind a warehouse. I'd made enemies, told the truth no one wanted to hear. But none of that mattered when Allison died. My only investigation after that became survival. For me. For my twin sons, Jake and Logan, who were only 5 years old and had just lost the only constant they'd ever known. The boys didn't know how to grieve. Hell, I didn't either. They just knew mommy wasn't there anymore. And that daddy, once solid and strong, now moved like he was underwater. At first, we tried routines. Breakfast at 8, cartoons at 9, a walk to the park. But Allison had been the glue that held those routines together. Without her, everything came undone. We hired a nanny, then another, and another. 8 in total, all highly qualified, with glowing references and smiles too big to be real. Each of them left after only a few days, some even sooner. They walked out of our house pale-faced, clothes stained, hair frazzled, like they'd been through battle. One muttered, "Those boys, they don't need a nanny. They need a miracle." Jake was the louder of the two. He'd scream, throw toys, kick doors. His tantrums were volcanic. Logan was different. He turned inward, would disappear for hours, hiding in closets, under beds, behind curtains. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was always about Allison, or rather, the absence of her. The house grew darker, heavier. I stopped working. I couldn't write. I couldn't think. I was barely functioning. I slept in 2-hour shifts and burned toast more often than I cooked real food. Jake developed a habit of dumping cereal on the floor just to watch the pieces scatter. Logan refused to wear anything except a tattered Batman hoodie. By the time the 8th nanny left, slamming the door behind her, I stood in the kitchen and let my head drop against the cabinet. My phone vibrated with yet another voicemail from the agency. I didn't answer. I was done. Then came the knock. It was soft. 1 knock, then 2. I opened the door expecting a neighbor, or maybe someone trying to sell me gutter protection I didn't want. Instead, there she was. She didn't look like a nanny. No clipboard, no pressed suit, no fake smile. Just a young woman with a quiet presence. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a light green cardigan. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her eyes, God, her eyes, held a depth I couldn't place. Not pity, not judgment, just stillness. "Hi," she said softly. "My name is Amara Fields. I heard you're looking for someone." I didn't say anything at first, just blinked. "I don't need an interview," she added quickly. I'd like to meet the boys, that's all. Just meet them." Something in her tone, humble, sincere, cut through the fog in my head. I stepped aside. "Jake's throwing a fit in the living room," I said, motioning behind me. "Logan's been in the hall closet for 3 hours. He won't come out." She nodded once and walked in like she belonged there. I followed her to the living room. Jake was red-faced, crying over a missing dinosaur toy. Crumbs were everywhere. A cup of juice had spilled across the rug. I braced myself for her to freeze, to panic, to try and negotiate with him like the others had, but she didn't. She turned to me, handed me a cup of coffee from her thermos, and said in a calm, even voice, "They're not difficult, Michael. They're scared." Then she crouched down and pulled a small, plush puppy from her canvas tote. "I brought a friend," she said gently, holding it out. Jake stopped mid-scream. His eyes flicked to the toy. In that moment, I didn't understand what I was witnessing. But something shifted. Amara moved slowly, patiently. She didn't demand. She didn't correct. She simply existed in the moment with them. She walked to the closet, knelt by the door, and started humming, a low, soothing melody. After a few minutes, Logan cracked open the door and peeked out. She held the puppy up, made it do a silly bark, and whispered, "He's looking for someone brave." Logan reached for it. That was the first time I had seen stillness in my house since Allison's death. I didn't ask her to stay. I didn't have to. She returned the next morning. Same cardigan, same coffee, same gentle presence. Chaos reigned again. Jake refused to wear socks. Logan dumped oatmeal on the dog. Amara didn't flinch. She handed Jake a different pair, gave the dog a bath with the boys watching and laughing, and never once raised her voice. Over the next few days, Amara became the constant I hadn't realized we needed. Jake pushed back, of course. He spilled milk on purpose, yelled at her, stomped his feet. "You're not my mom," he shouted once. Amara crouched down, helped him clean the spill, and said only, "Accidents happen. We fix things together." No judgment, no performance. Logan stayed quiet. He watched her, studied her. And then one evening, he padded into the living room while she read a picture book to Jake. Without a word, he placed his old baby blanket over her legs and sat beside her. I saw it, that crack of trust, small but real. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe. We weren't healed, but maybe, just maybe, we had found the beginning of something that could carry us through the storm. The second week came with no fanfare, no dramatic shifts or miraculous breakthroughs. Just the quiet, persistent presence of a woman who chose to show up day after day without demanding anything in return. Amara never asked for a schedule or gave me a list of child development goals like the others had. She didn't ask me to sign a contract, didn't lecture me on boundaries or discipline strategies. She just came. Each morning, she'd knock gently, step inside with her thermos in one hand, and that soft, steady gaze that seemed to see more than she let on. I'd started watching her, in the way a man does when he's too tired to believe in miracles, but too desperate not to hope. And every day she surprised me by doing the one thing no one else had done. She stayed. Jake, of course, tried to drive her out. He wasn't cruel, just a wounded kid who needed to know if love could survive the blast zone of grief. One afternoon, he hurled a juice box at the wall, then glared at her, waiting for the explosion. Amare calmly stood, picked up the pieces, handed him a rag, and crouched beside him. "You made a mess," she said. "That's okay. Let's clean it up together." No shame, no raised voice, just participation. The first time he told her, flat out, "You're not my mom," I froze in the hallway, bracing for the awkward tension that always followed that phrase. Amara didn't even blink. "You're right," she said softly, "and I never will be. But I care about you just the same." Then she walked into the kitchen, poured him another cup of juice, and continued on like nothing had broken. But something had, just not in the way I expected. A wall cracked. Something shifted in Jake that day. He didn't suddenly become obedient or cheerful, but the fury behind his defiance started to dim, as if for the first time since Allison died. Someone met his rage with calm instead of control. Someone showed him what safety could look like without conditions. Logan was harder to read. He was always quieter. Where Jake screamed, Logan vanished. He'd go hours without speaking, his small body curled in corners, his eyes darting. But with Amara, he didn't hide. He didn't speak much either. Not yet, but he followed her. If she sat on the floor, Logan would lie nearby. If she hummed while folding laundry, he'd mimic the tune from the other room. One night, I walked into the living room and found him standing behind her as she read a story aloud to Jake. Without a word, he laid his old stuffed elephant beside her, then walked away. Another crack, another quiet gesture of trust. Amara never pushed for affection, never asked them to like her. She didn't hover or smother. She simply was. She became the voice in the morning. "Good morning, Jake. Oatmeal or eggs today?" The hand on the shoulder when Logan's chest got tight at night. The anchor during tantrums. The quiet in the chaos. What startled me most wasn't how she handled the boys. It was how she changed the air in the house. I hadn't realized how heavy it had become, how thick with grief and tension, until it started to lift. I noticed it one evening when I heard laughter in the kitchen, real laughter. I walked in to see Amara kneeling by the fridge, a green pepper in one hand and Jake in fits of giggles. "I told you," she laughed. "I used to hate green things. But then someone told me cheese could make anything edible." Jake grinned. "Even broccoli?" "Especially broccoli." He tried it that night. Only one bite. But still, he tried it. Later at bedtime, Logan didn't resist brushing his teeth. Jake picked out a story instead of throwing the book across the room. Amara tucked them in without a lecture, without a speech. When she turned off the light, Logan whispered, "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" She paused, then leaned close. "Yes, I'll be here tomorrow." And she was, every day. When the mail piled up, she sorted it. When I forgot to eat, she left sandwiches on my desk. She never asked about my grief, never poked into memories that still bled. But sometimes I'd catch her looking at the photos of Allison on the hallway wall, not with curiosity, but with reverence. One night I passed by the living room to find her folding the boys' laundry. Jake was sitting nearby, watching. I expected silence. Instead, he said, out of nowhere, "Mom used to sing when she folded towels." Amara smiled. "Would you like me to sing?" He hesitated, then nodded. She sang softly, not the same song Allison used to sing, but something her own. Logan came from his room and curled beside her without a word. I watched from the hallway, my throat tight, a knot growing in my chest that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with hope. We were changing, slowly but undeniably. Jake stopped asking if Amara would leave. He just assumed she'd be there. He left her drawings on the fridge, told her jokes, tested boundaries, and waited for her to stay. Logan brought her his broken toy truck and sat silently while she repaired the wheel with glue and care. She never commented on how quiet he was, never rushed him to speak, just gave him space. I remember one rainy afternoon when Logan asked, in his small, scratchy voice, "Do moms go away?" Amara paused before answering. "Sometimes they have to," she said. "But the love they gave you, that never leaves. It stays right here." She tapped his chest gently. He didn't say anything else, but that night he asked her to read him a bedtime story. For the first time ever. It wasn't grand, it wasn't cinematic, but it mattered. The next morning, as the boys got ready for school, Amara slipped a note into each of their lunch boxes. Just a small, folded piece of paper. I didn't read them, but I saw the way Jake smiled when he opened his, and how Logan quietly tucked his into his pocket like it was a secret treasure. That evening, they came home with finger paint-covered shirts and jelly on their sleeves. Jake ran in ahead of Logan and called out, "Amara, we made a picture for you." He held up a construction paper drawing with 4 stick figures, one tall one labeled Dad, 2 smaller ones labeled Jake and Logan, and the fourth, slightly taller than the boys, labeled Amara. She knelt to accept it without a word, but I saw the way her hand trembled slightly as she pinned it to the fridge. We never spoke about labels. We didn't have to. She was becoming something we hadn't dared name, and when I saw the way the boys looked at her, trusting, unguarded, whole, I knew the storm hadn't passed completely. But the rain had slowed, and we finally had someone willing to stand in the storm with us, without an umbrella. Some storms don't announce themselves with thunder. They slip in silently, like a shadow at your feet. And before you realize it, everything is already wet and broken. That Thursday started like any other. Amara arrived early, the familiar soft knock on the door barely audible over the clatter of cereal bowls and morning cartoons. Jake was laughing at something ridiculous on TV, and Logan was tracing raindrops down the window with one finger. Our home had settled into a rhythm again, a rhythm that didn't erase the loss, but made it livable. I remember handing Amara her usual coffee from the new thermos I'd bought her as a thank you gift. She smiled, touched my hand in that quiet, unassuming way she did when words weren't necessary. Then the boys stormed in, yelling about field day and cupcakes and if she'd be coming to school pickup again. I'll be there, she promised. She didn't know it would be the last time. Later that afternoon, I was in my home office finishing a piece I had been trying to write for months. My fingers finally moved with purpose, with clarity I hadn't felt since before Allison passed. It was Amara who gave me that space. Her presence, constant, dependable, had softened the weight on my chest just enough to let the words come back. Then my phone buzzed. "Check this, you're in it." It was a text from an old colleague. A link followed. I clicked. My screen filled with the red and black of a tabloid's website. The headline was bold, toxic. From nanny to new wife, inside the scandal brewing, in Michael Harper's home beneath it. Photos, grainy, zoomed-in shots of Amara holding Logan's hand. One of her carrying cold medicine out of the corner pharmacy, and another of her stepping into our building beside me. The captions twisted kindness into something salacious. Who is Amara Fields really? Former teacher or secret opportunist? How fast is too fast to replace a grieving wife? My hands went cold. I scanned the article. It was brutal. They had dug up Amara's past, her brief teaching career, the resignation after a student's parent filed a baseless complaint, the personal blog she once kept about grief and healing. All of it was framed as manipulative, dangerous, inappropriate. Worse still, the article was published by a media empire run by Vincent Hale, a man I'd publicly exposed years ago for covering up an embezzlement scandal involving his own board. This wasn't journalism, it was revenge. I called Amara. She didn't answer. I ran to the school, but I was too late. She wasn't there for pickup. A substitute staff member informed me, carefully, uncomfortably, that due to community concerns and temporary suspension of volunteer privileges, Amara had been asked not to return to the school grounds. Jake's face twisted into a scowl when I told him she wouldn't be walking them home that day. Why not? She promised. Logan said nothing. He just gripped his backpack straps and walked ahead of me the whole way home. That evening, I found Amara on the back porch, sitting on the steps in the rain, knees pulled up to her chest. Her cardigan was soaked, her eyes distant, vacant. I brought her a towel and a cup of tea, but she didn't take them, just sat there, frozen. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally. "I never wanted them to get hurt because of me." "You didn't do anything wrong," I said, crouching beside her. "You've done everything right." She didn't respond. I didn't realize then that she had already made up her mind. By the next morning, she was gone. No goodbye, just absence. The boys woke up to a quiet house. I found 2 stuffed animals on their pillows, Logan's elephant and Jake's puppy, each with a small note tucked under a paw. Jake's read, "I'm not leaving you. Sometimes grown-ups step back to protect the ones they love. If your heart still has space for me, I'll find my way back." Logan's note was shorter. "I will always be your friend, even if I'm not there." "Love doesn't vanish," Jake screamed, threw the puppy across the room. "She lied. She said she'd be there." Logan didn't cry. He just curled into a ball under the dining table and didn't speak for 2 days. I was paralyzed. All the progress, the warmth, the laughter, the healing, it had drained out of the house like someone pulled the plug on our lives. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't tell my kids why someone so good had been chased away. But I could find the truth, and I could fight back. I spent the next 2 days calling every contact I had left from my years in journalism. I pulled favors, dug into publishing networks, tracked down where the hit piece had originated. The byline was fake, a ghost name, but the server trail led straight to Hale Media. No surprise. Vincent Hale had waited years for this. He knew I'd left journalism behind, knew I wouldn't retaliate. But he didn't know Amara, and he didn't know what she had become to us. I scheduled a press conference. It wasn't a flashy affair, just a rented space, a podium, and every camera I could summon from reporters who still respected me enough to show up. I stepped in front of the lights and cleared my throat. "My name is Michael Harper. Many of you knew me as a journalist. But today I'm speaking not as a professional, but as a father, and as a man who owes everything to someone the world has misjudged." I told them everything. The boys' grief, the failed nannies, the shattered home, and how one woman walked in, not to fix us, but to stay with us until we could start fixing ourselves. I named Amara. I spoke the truth of who she was. Not a predator, not a fraud. A person who saved two children without ever asking for recognition. I'll tell you who she is, I said, voice tight. She's the reason my sons smile again. She's the reason I remembered how to write. And if being compassionate makes her a target, then maybe it's not her we should be questioning. The clip went viral, but this time the comments were different. They weren't cruel, they weren't skeptical. They were full of strangers telling their own stories of caregivers who changed their lives, of step-parents, mentors, teachers who stayed when others walked away. And somewhere in a small cafe on the edge of Tacoma, Amara watched it play on a cracked phone screen. A barista told me later that she cried quietly into her scarf the whole time, that she didn't say a word, just watched it loop again and again. I sent her a text. If you still think you don't belong, look at what you built. No response, so Jake sent a voice message. Amara, if you hear this, please come home. Logan won't talk, and Toby misses you. That night it rained again, and there she was, soaked to the bone, standing outside our building in the dark, one hand gripping her canvas bag, eyes red and swollen. I opened the door, said nothing. She looked up. Her voice broke as she whispered, I don't know if I should come back. And I replied, I don't know how to do this without you. No grand gesture, no fireworks. Just the door, wide open, and behind me, the thundering sound of two boys running down the hallway. Logan reached her first. No words, just arms around her waist, face buried in her coat. Jake came next, holding Toby with a bright green scarf around his neck. So he'll never get lost again, Jake said. Amara knelt, pulled them both into her arms, and in that moment, nothing needed to be said. She had come home. Home felt different now. Not just because Amara had returned, but because this time her place within it was unquestioned. She was no longer the nanny, no longer someone filling space until the ache softened. She had become the rhythm of our mornings, the calm in our evenings, the voice the boys listened for when their dreams got loud. She was no longer beside us. She was with us. The day after she came back, I found her in the kitchen before dawn. Her cardigan was draped over a chair, and she stood barefoot by the counter, quietly slicing apples for the boys' lunches. Her movements were unhurried. She didn't look at me when she said, I still feel like I'm holding my breath. I stepped closer and touched her wrist gently. Then let's exhale together. From then on, things didn't just return to how they were. They grew, stronger, brighter, deeper. The boys welcomed her back without question. Logan was glued to her side for days, always holding onto a sleeve or the hem of her shirt. Jake started leaving her notes in his backpack, drawings of the four of us, usually with a fifth figure floating near the top, sometimes labeled baby with a question mark. At first I didn't know what he meant, until the night I found Amara sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, her hand on her stomach, her face unreadable. She looked up at me and whispered, I'm late. We didn't speak for a long time. Then she added, I wasn't planning any of this, Michael. Neither was I, but as she sat there waiting for me to react, to pull away, to panic, I realized I wasn't afraid. Not in the way I expected. I walked over, knelt in front of her, and placed my hands over hers. Maybe that's the point, I said. The test came back positive 2 days later, and somehow it made everything more real. Not just her place with us, but the idea that we were no longer mending something broken. We were building something new. Jake's eyes lit up when we told them. Will she like sharks? He asked, immediately listing names like Captain Finney and Princess Teeth. Logan didn't say much, but that night he crawled into Amara's lap, placed a hand on her belly, and just smiled. Weeks passed. Amara's belly grew. So did the boys' excitement. They sang songs to her stomach, read stories to it, drew pictures and taped them to her side of the fridge. And one spring morning, in a softly lit room at Seattle General Hospital, we heard it. A heartbeat, fast, steady, alive. It's a girl, the doctor said, turning the screen. Amara's breath caught. Her fingers clutched mine tighter. Strong heartbeat. Everything looks perfect. Tears slid down her cheeks. I kissed her knuckles. In that moment, hope didn't feel fragile. It felt like sunlight after months of rain. When we came home, the boys decorated the hallway with paper hearts and glitter stars. Jake wrote, "Welcome, baby sister," in shaky marker letters. Logan added a drawing of 5 stick figures standing under a rainbow. We named her Sunny, not just for the rare Seattle sunshine that marked her birth, but for the way she made us all feel. When Sunny arrived, everything paused. Time seemed to slow. Her first cry was soft, but sure. The boys pressed close to the hospital bed, each laying a blanket beside her bassinet. Amara was exhausted but radiant, her skin glowing, her eyes filled with something I can only describe as peace. "Does she hear us?" Jake whispered. "Does she like shark stories?" Logan asked, serious as ever. "She loves you already," Amara whispered. At home, the lullabies returned, but this time they were sweeter, warmer. Amara sang with Sunny in her arms, while Jake practiced counting with goldfish crackers, and Logan built elaborate Lego towers, always leaving space for one more figure at the top. Life was no longer a battlefield of grief. It was a living, breathing thing. Not perfect, but whole. One night, a few weeks after Sunny was born, Jake stood in the hallway, his voice uncertain. Amara was reading to Logan and rocking the baby at the same time. He hesitated, then said, "Mommy." The word hung in the air. Logan looked up. His voice followed softly. "Good night, Mommy." They hadn't rehearsed it. No one had asked them to.